Baldwin II of Jerusalem. Baldwin II, also known as Baldwin of Borg or Borg, Baldwin 1075 to 21st August 1131 was Count of Edessa from 1100 to 1118 and King of Jerusalem from 1118 until his death. He accompanied his cousins Godfrey of Bouillon and Baldwin of Boulogne to the Holy Land during the First Crusade. He succeeded Baldwin of Boulogne as the second Count of Edessa when he left the country for Jerusalem following his brother's death. He was captured at the Battle of Haran in 1104. He was held first by Sakban of Mardin, then by Kirmish of Mosul, and finally by Jawali Sakawa. During his captivity, Tancred the Crusader, ruler of the Principality of Antioch, and Tancred's cousin, Richard of Salerno, governed Edessa as Baldwin's regents. Baldwin was ransomed by his cousin Jocelyn of Courtenay, lord of Turbessel, in the summer of 1108. Tancred attempted to retain Edessa, but Bernard of Valence, the Latin patriarch of Antioch, persuaded him to restore the county to Baldwin. Baldwin allied with Jawali, but Tancred and his ally Radwan of Aleppo defeated them at Turbessel. Baldwin and Tancred were reconciled at an assembly of the Crusader leaders near Tripoli in April 1109. Maudud the Atabeg of Mosul and his successor Aksunkur al-Bursuki launched a series of campaigns against Edessa in the early 1110s, devastating the eastern regions of the country. Baldwin accused Jocelyn of treason for seizing the prosperous town of Turbessel from him in 1113 and captured the neighboring Armenian lordships in 1116 and 1117. Baldwin of Boulogne, the first king of Jerusalem, died on 2nd April 1118. He bequeathed Jerusalem to his brother Count Eustace III of Boulogne, stipulating that the throne was to be offered to Baldwin if Eustace failed to come to the Holy Land. Arnulf of Choc, the Latin patriarch of Jerusalem, and Jocelyn of Courtenay, who held the largest fief in the kingdom of Jerusalem, convinced their peers to elect Baldwin king. Baldwin took possession of most towns in the kingdom and gave Edessa to Jocelyn after the army of the Principality of Antioch was almost annihilated on 28 June 1119. Baldwin was elected regent for the absent Prince Bohemond II of Antioch. The frequent Seljuk invasions of Antioch forced him to spend most of his time in the principality, which caused discontent in Jerusalem. After Nur al-Dawlah Balak captured him in April 1123, a group of noblemen offered the throne to Count Charles I of Flanders, but Charles refused. During his absence, the Jerusalemite troops captured Tyre with the assistance of a Venetian fleet. After he was released in August 1124, he tried to capture Aleppo, but al-Bursuki forced him to abandon the siege in early 1125. Bohemond II came to Syria in October 1126. Baldwin gave his second daughter Alice in marriage to him and also renounced the regency. Baldwin planned to conquer Damascus, but he needed external support to achieve his goal. He married off his eldest daughter, Melisande, to the wealthy Count Fulk V of Anjou in 1129. The new troops who accompanied Fulk to Jerusalem enabled Baldwin to invade Damascene territory, but he could seize only Banias with the support of the Nizari or assassins. In late 1129, after Bohemond II was killed in a battle in early 1130, Baldwin forced Alice to leave Antioch and assumed the regency for her daughter, Constance. He fell seriously ill in Antioch and took monastic vows before he died in the Holy Sepulchre. Baldwin had been respected for his military talent, but he was notorious for his love for money. Early life. His birth year is unknown. It is only known that his father, Count Hugh I of Rethel was born in the 1040s, and Baldwin was already an adult by the 1090s. He was the Lord of Bourke when he joined the army of his kinsman Godfrey of Bouillon in the beginning of the First Crusade. The army departed for the Holy Land on 15th August 1096 and reached Constantinople on 23rd December. The Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos urged the Crusader leaders to take an oath of fealty to him. Godfrey of Bouillon appointed Baldwin, Conon of Montague, and Geoffrey of Esch to represent him at a meeting with Alexios in January 1097. After Godfrey and his principal commanders swore fealty to the emperor, the Crusader army was shipped to Asia Minor in February. Baldwin's cousin Baldwin of Boulogne and Tancred of Hauteville broke away from the main army to invade Cilicia around 15 September 1097. Baldwin accompanied them in Boulogne's contingent. He also participated in Boulogne's military campaigns against the Seljuk rulers of the fortresses on the plains near the river Euphrates. After seizing Ravendel, Turbessel, and Edessa, Boulogne established the first Crusader state, the county of Edessa, in early 1098. Baldwin rejoined the main Crusader army, which was marching towards Jerusalem, near Tyre in late May 1099. He and Tancred seized Bethlehem. There was no resistance as the town was inhabited by local Christians. The Crusaders laid siege to Jerusalem, and shortly afterwards Baldwin and Tancred captured an elderly Muslim nobleman. After he refused to convert to Christianity, Baldwin's soldiers beheaded him at the Tower of David to frighten the defenders of Jerusalem. Jerusalem fell to the Crusaders on 15th July. Baldwin left Jerusalem in the retinue of Count Robert II of Flanders in late August. Robert returned to Europe, but Baldwin remained in Syria. Geoffrey of Boulogne died on 18th July 1100. Baldwin of Boulogne decided to return to Jerusalem to take possession of Geoffrey's inheritance. Count of Edessa. First years. Baldwin was staying in Antioch when Baldwin of Boulogne decided to leave Edessa. He was a military commander of the troops of Bohemond I of Antioch, who had recently been captured by Danishmend Ghazi. Baldwin of Boulogne summoned Baldwin from Antioch and granted him the county of Edessa. Baldwin swore fealty to Baldwin of Boulogne, who left Edessa for Jerusalem on 2nd October 1100. Baldwin married Morphia, the daughter of Gabriel, the Armenian lord of Meliten, which enabled him to consolidate his position among his mainly Armenian subjects. Suckman, the Artukid ruler of Mardin, attacked Saruj in early 1101. Baldwin attempted to relieve the town, but Suckman routed his army, forcing him to return to Edessa. When relating these events, the Armenian historian Matthew of Edessa described Baldwin as a coward who was pitiful in body. Suckman captured the town, but the fortress resisted his siege. Baldwin went to Antioch to raise new troops before returning to Saruj. He forced Suckman to leave the town and executed all the townspeople who had cooperated with the Artukids. One of his cousins, Jocelyn of Courtenay, came to Edessa in 1102. Baldwin granted him lands to the west of the Euphrates. When the Egyptians invaded the kingdom of Jerusalem in May, Baldwin of Boulogne, who had been crowned king of Jerusalem, sent envoys to Tancred, who ruled Antioch, and Baldwin seeking their assistance. They assembled their troops and marched to Jerusalem together, but by the time they arrived in late September, the Egyptians had returned to their headquarters at Ascalon. The three Crusaders rulers made a raid against Ascalon, but Tancred and Baldwin soon returned to their realms. Tancred's ambitions in northern Syria irritated both Baldwin and Bernard of Valence, the Latin patriarch of Antioch. They started negotiations with Danishmend Ghazi regarding Bohemon's release. Co Vasil, the Armenian lord of Raban and Kaisun, and Bohemon's Italian kinsman, contributed to his ransom. Bohemond was set free in May 1103. Baldwin granted villages to the Armenian prelate Barsek Bakhlavuni because he wanted to strengthen his position among his Armenian subjects. First captivity. Baldwin's troops made frequent raids against the fertile plains around Haran. Suckman and Jekirmish, the Atabeg of Mosul, made an alliance and invaded Edessa in May 1104, while their troops were assembling at Ras Al Ain. Baldwin sent envoys to Jocelyn and Bohemond and persuaded them to make a joint attack against Haran. Baldwin, Bohemond, and Jocelyn went together to Haran and entered into negotiations with the Seljuk garrison for a peaceful surrender. However, both Baldwin and Bohemond wanted to seize the wealthy town, and the Crusader army started disintegrating because of their conflict. Suckman and Jakirmish attacked the Crusaders' camp at Haran on 7th May, applying the tactic of feint retreat. They drew the Crusaders into an ambush, capturing Baldwin and Jocelyn. Bohemond and Tancred rode to Edessa to save the town. Benedict, Archbishop of Edessa, who was also captured but quickly released, and the Edessan knights elected Tancred regent for the captive Baldwin. Baldwin was first taken to Suckman's tent, but Jakirmich's soldiers broke into it and dragged him away. Jocelyn remained in the custody of Suckman, passing to Ligazi upon the latter's death. The citizens of Turbessel paid a ransom for Jocelyn in 1107. Jakirmish laid siege to Edessa, but Tancred routed his troops, forcing them to flee. Jakirmish then took Baldwin to Mosul. Tancred captured the Seljuk princess of Jakirmish's household at Edessa. Jakirmish offered to pay 15,000 besans in ransom, or to release Baldwin in return for her liberty. Bohemond and Tancred preferred the money, and Baldwin remained imprisoned. Before his departure for Europe in the autumn, Bohemond appointed Tancred to rule Antioch and their kinsman. Richard of Salerno was entrusted with the administration of Edessa. A Turkish soldier of fortune, Javali Sakawa, captured Chikirmish and seized Mosul in 1107. Jocelyn started negotiations with Javali over the release of Baldwin. Javali demanded 60,000 dinars and the release of the Muslim prisoners from Edessa. The Seljuk Sultan Muhammad I Tapar made a Mamluk Modod Atabeg of Mosul. When Modod expelled Javali from Mosul, Javali fled to the fortress of Kalat Jabbar, taking Baldwin with him. Jocelyn paid 30,000 dinars to Javali and offered himself as hostage to guarantee the payment of the balance. Javali, who needed allies against Madud, accepted the offer and released Baldwin in the summer of 1108. Conflicts. Baldwin went to Edessa after his release, but Tancred demanded his oath of fealty in exchange for the town. Baldwin refused and went to Turbessel. After Tancred carried out a raid against Turbessel, they started peace negotiations but could not reach a compromise. Baldwin made an alliance with Cog Vasil against Tancred. Oshin of Lampron also sent troops, 300 passionate horsemen, to join them. Their raids against the Principality of Antioch persuaded Tancred to accept the arbitration of the Catholic prelates, who decided in favor of Baldwin. He returned to Edessa on 18 September 1108. In accordance with this treaty with Jawali, Baldwin released most of the Muslim prisoners held in Edessa. He also allowed the Muslim burghers of Saruj to build a mosque, and executed the unpopular Rais or governor of the town, who was a convert from Islam. Javali's alliance with Baldwin alarmed Fakhr al-Mulk Radwan, the Seljuk ruler of Aleppo, which brought about a rapprochement between Radwan and Tancred. When Javali launched a military expedition against Aleppo, Baldwin and Jocelyn of Courtney joined him, while Tancred came to assist Radwan. Radwan and Tancred ruled Javali, Baldwin, and Jocelyn near Turbessel in late September 1108. Baldwin fled the battlefield to a nearby fortress. Tancred laid siege to it, but lifted the siege when he learned of Javali's approach. Believing that Baldwin had died, the Armenian burghers of Edessa held an assembly to set up a provisional government. After his return, Baldwin thought that the Armenians wanted to dethrone him and ordered the blinding of the ringleaders. The Armenian bishop of the town was obliged to pay a huge fine. To put an end to the conflicts between the Crusader leaders, Baldwin I of Jerusalem summoned them in the name of the Church of Jerusalem to Mount Pilgrim near Tripoli in April 1109. At the meeting, the king mediated a reconciliation between Baldwin and Tancred, who acknowledged Baldwin's rule in the county of Edessa in exchange for receiving Galilee and other fiefs in the kingdom of Jerusalem. Thereafter, Baldwin participated in the siege of Tripoli, which ended with the capture of the town by the Crusaders. Modad's campaigns. The Seljuk Sultan instructed Modad to unite his troops with the Seljuk ruler of Armenia, Sokman al-Qutbi, and the Artukid Ligazi against the Crusaders. They laid siege to Edessa in April 1110. Baldwin sent envoys to Baldwin I of Jerusalem, who was besieging Beirut, urging him to come to his rescue, but the king did not abandon the siege until Beirut fell on 13th May. Before departing for Edessa, Baldwin I celebrated Pentecost in Jerusalem. The king persuaded Bertrand of Tripoli, Jocelyn of Courtenay, and other crusader leaders to join his campaign, and the Armenian Ko Vasil and Abu Gharib also sent contingents. On their arrival, Modon and his allies lifted the siege of Edessa and withdrew towards Haran. Baldwin and Tancred accused each other of having incited the invasion. Tancred also claimed sovereignty over the county of Edessa, saying that its territory had been subject to Antioch under the Byzantine Empire. Baldwin I refuted Tancred's claim, declaring himself the head of the Latin East. After a short campaign against the neighboring Muslim territories, the rulers of the other Crusader states decided to leave the county. On the king's advice, Baldwin ordered the transfer of the local Christian, predominantly Armenian peasants to the lands to the west of the Euphrates, taking advantage of the gathering of the Christian peasants by the river and their mainly Armenian escort. Maudud attacked and massacred them. Baldwin, who had already crossed the river along with the other Crusader leaders, hastily returned and assaulted Maudud's troops. Although they outnumbered his small retinue, Baldwin and his men were only saved by Baldwin first and Tancred, who had followed on the other bank of the river. In July 1111, Maudud launched a new invasion against the county and laid siege to Turbasel. While Maudud was besieging Turbasel, Sultan and Munkudite emir or ruler of Shaizar sent envoys to him seeking his assistance against Tancred. Maudud lifted the siege of Turbasel and moved to help Shaizar. Toktakin, the Atabeg of Damascus, joined him and they decided to conquer Tripoli in September. The concentration of Muslim forces alarmed the Crusaders of Baldwin I of Jerusalem, summoned all Crusader rulers to his camp. Baldwin complied and accompanied by his two powerful vassals, Jocelyn and Pagan of Sajar. The smaller Muslim rulers had meanwhile left Maudud's camp and returned to Mesopotamia. Maudud did not risk a pitched battle with the united Crusader armies and retired first to Shaizar and later to Mosul. In April 1112, Maudud returned and besieged Edessa. His agents started secret negotiations with some Armenian soldiers in the town, but Jocelyn, who was informed of the plot, warned Baldwin. Maudud could not capture the town and withdrew to Mosul in June. Next year, he was murdered by assassins at Damascus. Maudud's invasion devastated the eastern regions of the county, but Jocelyn's fief at Turbasel still flourished. In 1113, Baldwin persuaded Jocelyn to come to Edessa, saying that he was dying and wanted to make his last will, stating that Jocelyn had not sent enough food to Edessa. Baldwin had him imprisoned and only released him after Jocelyn renounced Turbasel. Jocelyn soon left the county for Jerusalem, where Baldwin I granted Galilee to him. A new reconciliation between the Crusader leaders was brought about by marriage alliances. Baldwin's sister, Cecilia, was given in marriage to Roger of Salerno, who had succeeded Tancred in Antioch in late 1112. and Jocelyn married Roger's sister Maria. Expansion. While Baldwin was away from his capital to take possession of Turbessel, the Armenians of Edessa continued to plot against him. He returned to the town and ordered the transportation of the Armenian townspeople to Samosata. After the Armenians started to move to Kaisun, Baldwin allowed those who remained in Samosata to return to Edessa in early 1114. Mahmud's successor Aksum-Kur al-Bursuki invaded the county in May 1114, but Edessa resisted his siege, forcing him to return to Mosul. The Sultan made Bursuk ibn Bursuk of Hamadan the supreme commander of the Seljuk armies. Bursuk moved on Edessa in early 1115, but he soon left for Aleppo. Ulu el Yahya, the Atabek of Aleppo, sought assistance from Ilghazi and Toktekin, who also persuaded Roger of Salerno to join their coalition against Bursuk. At Roger's request, Baldwin I of Jerusalem, Pons of Tripoli, and Baldwin also gathered their troops at Aparnia in August. Bursuk chose to retreat, and the Crusader rulers dispersed. Taking advantage of the weakening of the Seljuks' power after Roger of Salerno's victory at the Battle of Sarmin, Baldwin decided to annex the small Armenian principalities in the valley of the Euphrates. The Armenian Thoros I of Cilicia captured Vasil's successor, Vasil Dgha, who had made an alliance with Bursuk. Thoros sold Vasil Dgha to Baldwin, who forced his prisoner to renounce Raban and Kalsun in 1116. Next, Baldwin laid siege to Abu Gharib's fortress of Birejik. The siege lasted for a year, and Abu Gharib was forced into surrender in 1117. Baldwin granted the fortress to his cousin Waleran of Le Puise. In the same year, Vasil's brother Bagrat had to abandon Cyrus, and Baldwin captured Constantine of Gargar, king of Jerusalem. Ascension to the throne. The childless Baldwin I of Jerusalem died on 2nd April 1118 during a campaign against Egypt. According to the contemporaneous Albert of Aachen, he had willed the kingdom to his eldest brother, Eustace III of Boulogne, if by chance he would come. He also stipulated that Baldwin of Berk should be elected king. If Eustace were unable to come because of his age, Baldwin arrived in Jerusalem around the day when the late king's body was carried into the town. Albert of Aachen stated that Baldwin had come to celebrate Easter in Jerusalem without having any knowledge of the king's death. Decades later, William of Tyre recorded that Baldwin had been informed of his kinsman's death during his journey to Jerusalem. The question of Baldwin I's succession divided the barons and the prelates. According to William of Tyre, the highest ranking prelate, Arnulf of Chalk, the Latin patriarch of Jerusalem, and Jocelyn of Courtenay, who held the largest fief in the kingdom, argued that Baldwin should be elected without delay to avoid an interregnum. Others maintained that the crown should first be offered to Eustace in accordance with Baldwin I's last will. Some great nobles, whom William of Tyre did not name, were appointed to inform Eustace of his brother's death. However, shortly after their departure, on Easter Day, the 14th April, Baldwin was anointed. His coronation was delayed for unknown reasons. Patriarch Arnulf died 2 weeks after Baldwin's anointment, and his successor, Warmond of Picquigny, was only installed in August or September. Baldwin promised the county of Edessa to Jocelyn, but Jocelyn remained in the kingdom to secure the defense of Galilee. Baldwin convoked the noblemen to an assembly on an appointed day to receive fealty and an oath of allegiance from them. According to Albert of Aachen, he also secured the direct royal control of 8 important towns, including Nablus, Jaffa, Acre, Sidon, and Tiberias. Modern historian L.A. Murray argues that Albert of Aachen's words are evidence that Baldwin carried out the major distribution of fiefs, granting out some lordships but retaining other towns and territories as domain lands in 1118. Baldwin also reorganized the royal household, making Hugh Collis constable, Pagan butler, and John the chamberlain. Eustace accepted the barons' invitation and left alone for Jerusalem. He had traveled as far as Apulia when he was informed for Baldwin's ascension to the throne. The delegates tried to convince him to continue his journey, saying that Baldwin's election was illegal, but Eustace preferred to return home. Muslim threat. His predecessor's last campaign against Egypt brought about a rapprochement between Egypt and Damascus. Baldwin sent envoys to Totekin in Damascus to argue against his making an alliance with the Egyptian vizier Al-Afdal Shah Khan Shah, but Toktekin demanded Jourdan in return for his neutrality. Totekin launched an incursion against Galilee, and Al-Afdal gathered his troops near Ascalon. In May or June 1118, Baldwin hurried to the southern frontier and urged Roger and Pons to send reinforcements from Antioch and Tripoli. Neither the Egyptians nor the Crusaders risked the pitched battle, and both armies were dissolved 3 months later. Baldwin and Jocelyn made a raid against Damascene territory in the autumn and defeated Totekin's son Taj al-Muluk Buri near Dara. Il-Ghazi, Totekin, and Muqaddis of Shaisar made an alliance, and their troops started raiding Antioch and Edessa in May 1119. Roger sent envoys to Baldwin, urging him to come to the north to fight against the invaders. The envoys met with Baldwin in Tiberias because he had just concluded a short campaign against the Bedouin tribe in Jourdan. He gathered troops and departed for Antioch, taking a portion of the True Cross with him. Roger did not wait until Baldwin's arrival and marched from Antioch. On the plains of Sarmada, Lilgazi army encircled the Crusaders' camp on 28 June, inflicted a major defeat in the Battle of the Field of Blood. Roger and hundreds of his soldiers died fighting, and most who survived the battle were taken prisoner. Antioch was left almost undefended, but Ilghazi did not attack the city. Baldwin and Pons of Tripoli reached Antioch in late July or early August. The leaders of the city acknowledged Baldwin as regent for their lawful prince, the 10-year-old Bohemond II, who was living in southern Italy. Baldwin distributed the estates to the noblemen who had perished in the field of blood among his retainers, mainly through giving the widows of the deceased lords to them in marriage. Meanwhile, Ilghazi and Totekin joined their forces and started to capture the Antiochian fortresses to the east of the Orontes River. Baldwin gathered almost all available Crusader troops and marched against the Muslims as far as Tel Danit near Zardania. The Crusaders and the united armies of Totekin and El-Ghazi crashed in the Battle of Hab on 14th August. According to Walter the Chancellor, the Crusaders routed the Muslims, but Matthew of Edessa stated that neither side was defeated nor was victorious. Baldwin returned to Antioch 2 days later, where the townspeople and the patriarch gave him a victor's welcome. Before leaving Antioch, he granted the county of Edessa to Jocelyn of Courtenay. Baldwin and his wife were crowned king and queen in Bethlehem on Christmas Day. He and the patriarch held the general assembly at the Council of Nablus on 16th January 1120. The prelates and noblemen who attended the meeting confirmed the clergy's right to collect the tithe and to bear arms in the cause of defense. The council also ordered the punishment of adulterers, pimps, sodomites, and bigamists, and prohibited sexual relations between Christians and Muslims. Other decrees established penalties against thieves and those who falsely accused others of crimes. The decisions of the council were the first examples of law making in the kingdom of Jerusalem. A confraternity of knights established by Hugh of Pains and Godfrey de Saint Omer to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land most probably received official recognition at the council according to historians Malcolm Barber and Christopher Tierman. Baldwin temporarily lodged the knights in the royal palace in the Temple Mount, and they became known as the Knights Templar. He offered Nabi Samui to the Cistercians, but Bernard of Clairvaux ceded the place to the Premonstratensians who built the monastery. Shortly after the council, Baldwin and Patriarch Warman also sent letters to Pope Calixtus II and the Venetians, urging them to support the defense of the Holy Land. The Crusaders especially needed the Venetian ships against the Egyptians. Ilghazi and his nephew Belek Ghazi invaded Edessa and Antioch in May 1120, being responsible for the defense of the northern Crusader states. Baldwin decided to again to lead his troops to Antioch, but a significant group of the Jerusalemite noblemen and clergy opposed the expedition. Patriarch Warmond refused to accompany the royal army and allowed Baldwin to take the true cross with him, only after lengthy negotiations. Baldwin and his army reached Antioch in June. El-Ghazi agreed to sign a one-year truce which secured the possession of Kafartab and two other fortresses for the Crusaders. Baldwin returned to Jerusalem only in early 1121, after Teutokin made a raid against Galilee. In July, he invaded Damascene territory and destroyed a fortress that Teutokin had recently erected near Jerash. David IV of Georgia routed the united armies of Ilghazi and the Seljuk Prince Torul Arshian in August, taking advantage of Ilghazi weakness. Baldwin launched a military campaign across Orontes. In November, this forced Ilghazi's son to hand over to the Crusaders Zadana, Atarib, and other forts that Ilghazi had captured the previous year. In early 1122, Ponce of Tripoli refused to pledge allegiance to Baldwin for unknown reasons. After Baldwin mustered his troops and marched against Tripoli, Ponce paid homage to him without resistance. El-Ghazi and Belek laid siege to Zardana in June, but Baldwin and Jocelyn of Edessa, a rival, forced them to lift the siege in July. Belek ambushed and captured Jocelyn near Saruk on 13 September. El-Ghazi occupied Atarib, but he died on 3 November 1122. His lands were divided among his sons and nephews. Baldwin, who was still in Antioch, persuaded Badr al-Dawla Suleiman, the new ruler of Aleppo, to restore Atarib to the Crusaders on 2 April 1123. Baldwin recaptured Birajik and made Geoffrey, Lord of Marash, regent of Edessa. Second captivity. Baldwin made a raid toward Carpush, where Belek held Jocelyn and other knights captive, but he stopped near Gargar. While Baldwin was preparing to practice falconry on the morning of 18th April 1122, Belek attacked the camp and captured him. Baldwin was taken to the fortress of Karput. While Belek was away in Aleppo in June, Jocelyn's 50 Armenian supporters came to Karput and disguising themselves as monks and expelled the Seljuk garrison from the fortress. Jocelyn left Karput to gather troops in Turbessel and Antioch, but Baldwin and the Armenian soldiers remained in the fortress to defend it against Belek. Belek returned to Karput and forced Baldwin to surrender. Belek ordered the execution of the Armenians and transferred Baldwin to Haran. Baldwin was later imprisoned in the citadel of Aleppo. On learning of Baldwin's captivity, Patriarch Warman convoked the prelates and barons to an assembly which elected Eustace Grenier Balif or regent of Jerusalem. After Grenier died on 15 June, William of Bourges succeeded him as regent. The bailiffs and the patriarch closely cooperated with each other and other high-ranking officials in administering the kingdom during Baldwin's captivity. They made an alliance, the so-called Pactum Vermundi, with Domenico Michiel, the Duke of Venice, offering commercial privileges to the Venetians in return for their military assistance against the Egyptian towns on the coast. They captured Tyre on 7th or 8th July in 1124. The contemporaneous Gobert of Bruges recorded that delegates came to Flanders from Jerusalem during Baldwin's captivity. They stated that Baldwin was grasping and penurious, and had not governed the people of God well. They offered the crown to Charles the Good, Count of Flanders. Bridges' report shows that a faction of the Jerusalemite nobility attempted to dethrone the captive Baldwin, being the head of the lineage from which the first two rulers of Jerusalem were descended, and also the overlord of their brother Eustace. Charles the Good was an ideal candidate for the throne. However, he refused the offer. Murray tentatively associated the leader of the discontented noblemen with the Flemish Eustace Grenier. Bellic died fighting against one of his rebellious officials in 6th May 1124, and Baldwin was seized by El Ghazi's son Timurtash. Timurtash entrusted Sultan, the Emir of Shaizar, with commencing negotiations for Baldwin's release with Jocelyn and Morphia. According to their agreement, Baldwin was to pay 80,000 dinars and to cede Atarib, Zardana, Azaz, and other Antiochian fortresses to Timurtash. Baldwin also promised that he would assist Timurtash against the Bedouin warlord Dubai ibn Sadaqah. After a quarter of Baldwin's ransom was paid and a dozen hostages, including Baldwin's younger daughter Ioveta and Jocelyn's son Jocelyn II, were handed over to Timurtash to secure the payment of the balance. Baldwin was released on 29th August 1124. Wars. Baldwin went to Antioch, where Patriarch Bernard reminded him that he had not been authorized to renounce Antiochian territories, and on 6 September 1124 forbade him to cede fortresses to Timurtash. On 6 October, Baldwin laid siege to Aleppo, where the hostages for his ransom were held. Dubai ibn Sadaqah and two Seljuk princes, Sultan Shah ibn Radwan and Toghrul Arslan, joined him, and Timurtash did not support the besieged town. Il-Bursuki decided to intervene and gathered his troops. On learning of al-Bursuki's approach, Dubai ibn Sadaqah withdrew from Aleppo, which forced Baldwin to lift the siege on 25th January 1125. After more than 2 years' absence, Baldwin returned to Jerusalem on 3rd April. He renegotiated the Pactum Vermundi with the Venetians, approving most of its terms in the so-called Pactum Balduini, but also stipulating that the Venetians were to provide military assistance to the kingdom. After all, Barsuki, Totekin, and Kirkan of Qom captured Kafartab and laid siege to Zadana. Baldwin again went north. Few knights accompanied him from the kingdom, which, according to Murray and Barber, may have been a sign of discontent over his frequent campaigns. Pawns of Tripoli and Jocelyn of Edessa joined him, and they defeated the Seljuks at the Battle of Azaz in late May. The battle has been described by historian Peter Locke as one of the bloodiest engagements in the history of the Crusader states. Spoils seized enabled Baldwin to pay off his ransom before his return to Jerusalem. The careers of some influential lords started around the time of when Baldwin returned to Jerusalem in 1125. Walter I Brisebar witnessed the Pactum Balduini as Lord of Beirut on 2nd May 1125. Pagan the Butler was first mentioned as Lord of Outre Jourdain in 1126. According to William of Tyre, Pagan seized Outre Jourdain after Roman of Le Puy and his son Rolf and had been deprived of the territory. Murray argues that Baldwin must have confiscated Outre Jourdain from Roman because Roman had been one of his opponents during his captivity. Murray also says that Baldwin allegedly adopted an expansionist policy against Damascus in the late 1120s to assuage the Jerusalemite noblemen's discontent. He made a raid against Damascene territory across the Jordan in early 1126. Accompanied by almost the whole army, Baldwin routed Tottekin on 25th January and returned to the kingdom laden with booty. Shortly thereafter, he supported Pawns of Tripoli in capturing Rafinia and in raiding Oms. Al-Bursuki laid siege to Atarib in July 1126. Baldwin again marched north and Jocelyn of Edessa joined him at Arta. Both sides wanted to avoid a pitched battle, and al-Bursuki retired to Aleppo. Succession after reaching the age of majority, Bochemon II of Antioch came to Syria to claim his inheritance on October 1126. His arrival put an end to Baldwin's rule in Antioch, but Bohemond married Baldwin's second daughter Alice. Baldwin, who had no sons, made his eldest daughter Melisande his heir in 1126 or 1127. Baldwin had already realized that the Crusaders were unable to conquer Damascus without further reinforcements from Europe. After consulting with his nobles, he sent William I of Bourges and Guy I of Brissabar to France to offer Melisandre's hand to the powerful Count of Anjou, Fulk V. In the autumn of 1127, Hugh of Paynes and his five fellows accompanied the envoys. The embassy first visited Louis VI of France, who gave consent to the marriage. The negotiations between Fulk and Baldwin's envoys lasted for months. In August of September 1127, Baldwin launched a new military campaign against Damascene territory. Historian Stephen Tibble proposes that the royal fortress at Wadi Musa was built shortly after this. Baldwin dispatched William I, Archbishop of Tyre, and Robert, Bishop of Leda and Ramla, to the Holy See. Pope Honorius II stated that Baldwin was the lawful ruler of Jerusalem in a letter of 29th May 1129. Christopher Tierman and Hans Eberhard Meyer agreed that the Pope wrote his letter to remove any doubts about the legitimacy of Baldwin's rule. On the other hand, Stephen of Laferte, who had succeeded Warmond of Piccuni as patriarch in July 1128, turned against Baldwin and demanded Jerusalem for the patriarchate. Folk of Anjou arrived to the Holy Land in the spring of 1129. He married Melisande, and Baldwin granted them the two wealthiest towns of the kingdom, Tyre and Acre. Hugh of Paynes, who had achieved the adoption of the statutes of the Knights Templar at the Council of Troyes, returned to the kingdom accompanied by new crusaders. Totekin's successor, Taj al-Muluk Buri, ordered the massacre of the Nizari in Damascus in September 1129. The Nizari's local leader, Ismail al-Ajami, sent envoys to Baldwin and offered the fortress of Banyas to the Crusaders in return for receiving asylum in the kingdom. Baldwin accepted the offer, and his troops seized Banyas, taking advantage of the presence of the new crusaders. He also decided to launch an attack on Damascus. He gathered all available troops and marched as far as the wooden bridge, about 10 kilometers (6.2 miles) southwest of the town. In November, after Bury's Turkoman horsemen routed a detachment of the Crusader army and a heavy storm turned the plains around Damascus into large marshland, Baldwin had to return to Jerusalem in early December. After the Danishman Ghazi Gumush Tigin ambushed and killed Bohemond II in February 1130, Baldwin traveled to Antioch to make arrangements for the administration of the principality. Alice, however, wanted to establish herself as regent during the minority of her and Bohemond's infant daughter, Constance, and did not allow Baldwin to enter Antioch. She even sent envoys to Imad ad-Din Zengi, the Atabeg of Mosul, to seek his assistance against her father. According to the contemporaneous Ibn al-Kalanisi, the Antiochian noblemen were strongly opposed to her plan, and opened two gates of the town, which enabled Baldwin to enter. He forgave his daughter, but forbade her to stay in Antioch during Constance's minority. After the Antiochian noblemen swore fealty to him and Constance, Baldwin appointed Jocelyn of Edessa to administer the principality. According to William of Tyre, Baldwin fell seriously ill after his return from Antioch. He was already dying when he made arrangements for his succession in August 1131. He was transferred to the patriarch's palace near the Holy Sepulchre, where he bequeathed the kingdom to Fulk, Melisande, and their infant son Baldwin. He took monastic vows and entered the collegiate chapter of the Holy Sepulchre, where he died on 21st August. He was buried in the Holy Sepulchre. Ancestry: Baldwin was a younger son of Hugh, first Count of Rethel, and Melisande of Montfleury. He was closely related to the lords of Courtenay and Le Poussey and other noble families in the Ile-de-France. He was also a kinsman of the brothers Eustace III of Boulogne, Godfrey of Boulogne, and Baldwin of Boulogne, but their exact relationship is unknown. The main concern are the identities of Baldwin II's paternal grandmother and great grandmother. The Chronicles of Alberic of Trois Fontaines, written in 1119, describes Yvette, sister of Eble I of Roussy, as mother of Hugh, first Count of Rethel. This is the traditional genealogy given for Baldwin II. Notwithstanding, considering her family history, such assertion is chronologically impossible. John Noel Matthew raises the fundamental objection that Eblas I, who died in 1033, could not have had a sister who was still alive in 1081. Instead, he argues that she must have been confused with the wife of Manasseh II. L'Histoire de Jerusalem et d'Antioche, written in the 12th century, indicates that the Manasseh III was married to the daughter of Godfrey III, Duke of Lower Lorraine. This would also explain the connection between the two Baldwins of Jerusalem, as well as the fact that Godfrey made a donation to Manasseh in 1065. Ellen V. Murray says that the primary sources suggest that Baldwin II's connection to his predecessors was not particularly close, and that Baldwin was most probably related to their mother, Ida of Lorraine. Thomas Asbridge says that Baldwin was their second cousin instead. The family tree below is the reconstruction based on the above two records, which makes Baldwin the second or first cousin once removed of his predecessors through their mother. Ashbridge's view would match the alternate hypothesis that has Godfrey III's wife Doda as Manasseh III's sister instead of his mother-in-law. There is also a hypothesis that Judith was Eustace II's sister. However, Murray objects that there is no allusion of this daughter nor of any other connection between the Rethel and Boulogne families in Genealogica Comitum Bolognensium, a compilation of the Boulogne genealogy which was being copied and extended by the mid-12th century, when the descendants of Manasseh III were ruling the kingdom of Jerusalem. The three women in question are in italics. Family: most Armenians adhere to the Armenian Apostolic Church, but Baldwin's wife Morphea was born to an Orthodox noble family. Her father Gabriel gave her in marriage to Baldwin because he needed the Crusaders' support against his enemies. Morphea gave birth to four daughters. She died on 1st October 1126 on 1127. The eldest daughter of Baldwin and Morphea, Melisande, succeeded Baldwin along with her husband Fulk. They were crowned in the Holy Sepulchre on 14th September 1131. Baldwin's second daughter, Alice, made several attempts to administer Antioch after Baldwin's death. Hodierna was Baldwin and Morphea's third daughter. Hugh was given in marriage to Raymond II, Count of Tripoli, before 1138. Jovetta was her parents' youngest daughter, and their only child. Born into the purple that is after her father's coronation, she entered the convent of St. Anne in Jerusalem around 1134. About 10 years later, she became the second abbess of the convent that Melisande had established at the tomb of Lazarus in Bethany. Legacy: Baldwin's contemporaries often criticized him. Matthew of Edessa, who recorded the Armenians' grievances during Baldwin's reign in Edessa, described him as a greedy ruler who had an intolerable love for money. Stephen of Blois, an ascetic monk who settled in the Amanus Mountains, blamed him for certain enormities in his way of life. Fulcher of Chartres hinted that Baldwin's captivity was a punishment for sin, because he had never seen other kings who were imprisoned. William of Tyre described Baldwin as a devout and God fearing man notable for his loyalty and for his great experience in military matters, and said that he was nicknamed the Thorny, cognominatus est Aculeus. Ibn al-Qalanisi, who calls him Baldwin the Little, Bagdawin al-Ru'ayi, to distinguish him from Baldwin I, remarked that after him there was none left amongst them possessed of sound judgment and capacity to govern.